Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome to my channel. So the other day I was talking about cake pricing and I told you to go to that video, but that video didn't exist until today. So obviously, pricing your cakes is a very, very important aspect of your at-home baking business, or any baking business for that matter. But pricing is not just important for you, it's also important to have a set of parameters and guidelines for your customers as well. They want to know how you came up to the price that you did. So in today's video, I'm going to be going over the importance of setting those parameters, how to set those parameters, and finally, I'm going to show you some cakes of mine and how I price them. So let's get into it. So firstly, let's talk about why it's so important to set these parameters. So I know I just mentioned that it's important because your customers want to know how you got to that price, but you can't just say, oh, I charged this because it's this size, and that's the end of it. We all know how cake decorating is such a process, and it is an art form. That being said, I do want you to keep in mind that even if you were to go and buy art, for example, you're going to get a large range of prices. So just like with art, you're also going to have that large range with cake decorating as well. So don't be too discouraged if you see that other people have completely different prices than you. If you saw my pricing video previously where I asked different bakeries what they thought, you can see what a large range bakeries, home bakeries, storefronts, they all have a huge range. So firstly, I'm going to tell you what parameters you need to set. I also want to put a little disclaimer on this video. There's never going to be a perfect pricing guide. Even pricing calculators and people telling you to triple the cost of ingredients to formulate how much your cake is going to be, those are great starting points, but it's never actually going to fully formulate how much you should be charging for your cakes. It's such a personal thing that there is no right or wrong answer. The only time it's right or wrong is if you find that you're doing so much work for so little payoff. Chances are, if you're a cake decorator, it's not going to be the other way around because you're just so invested in the craft of making something beautiful or cute or whatever you're wanting to portray through your cake designs. So the first set of parameters that you need to set is for your base cakes. This is really, really important. You need to determine what size cakes you're going to sell and the exact starting price of each cake. People love to see this. If they go on your website or your Facebook or wherever you're selling your cakes from, then if they don't see a base pricing, it can make them feel a little bit uneasy because then that might give the impression that you kind of just make up your prices on the spot. And we really, really don't want to make our customers feel uncomfortable. We want to make them feel like there is a set guideline and there is rhyme or reason for why they charge a certain price for certain cakes. So for myself, this is how I priced my things. So for a 6-inch cake, and this is completely a naked iced cake, so just the filling and just a swipe of icing, I would be charging $40. For an 8-inch cake, I would be charging $55. For a 10-inch cake, I would be charging $70. So keep in mind, this is with no decoration whatsoever. This is purely your baking and your fillings and a little bit of frosting on the top. Now, this is a great option for people who want to have a naked ice cake and put their own florals on, for example. But most customers are not going to order that. However, it's always good to have just a little bit of a guideline for your base price. The next parameter that you need to set is you need to say how much you're going to charge for a buttercream smoothed cake. So for myself, I charge an additional $15 per cake size. So for example, I charge $40 for a 6-inch cake. That means I'm going to be charging $55 for a smooth buttercream iced cake. How I came up to that price is because butter here is very expensive, and it also takes quite a bit of time to actually make a huge batch of buttercream to cover a 6-inch cake. I know for myself that my personal recipe only just barely covers a 6-inch cake, and that only happens if I perfectly ice the cake. So again, that's a personal preference for myself, but I feel like that pricing is fair, and that's a great guideline for my customers. If you want a smoothed buttercream cake with nothing else on it, then that is the price. You also need to determine how much you're going to charge for a fondant smoothed cake. Literally just the fondant on top, nothing else. And you need to make sure that you have that for each cake. For myself, I charge an additional $20 to $25. Sometimes it really depends on what they're asking for. If they're asking me to dye it a specific color, then I go more towards the $25 end. If they're asking me just for white or for a primary color that the fondant already comes in, then I stay at the $20 addition range. Guideline gets a little bit more tricky. So this would be your fondant 2D appliques. So something like a polka dot or a flat flower or a flat snowflake. So generally there is a very popular kind of trend where you just kind of put these appliques on all over, and for something like that I would charge an additional $15 to $20 depending on what it is. So you want to set that parameter as well. Where do your 2D fondant appliques start in terms of pricing? And as we go on in the guidelines here, it's going to get more and more complicated. So the next one would be your buttercream details. Now, buttercream details can really range. For example, for a rosette cake, yes, the rosette itself is not that difficult once you master it, so it doesn't take that much time. However, that is a lot of butter, and for where I live, I would need to make a lot of buttercream in order to make a rosette cake. So I'm going to be charging quite a bit more for something like a rosette cake, despite the fact that it is easy for myself to do the technique. In this instance, I am thinking more about what is the actual cost of ingredients, as well as the work that it's going to take to make the buttercream itself. Because as you know, I make Italian meringue buttercream, which is just those few extra more steps than American buttercream. And Italian meringue buttercreams also have eggs, which obviously drives up the cost even a little bit more. So when you're setting that guideline for your buttercream details, you always want to put something like starting at an additional $20 and up or whatever. That way you're allowing yourself to kind of have a little bit of flexibility with that. If they're asking you to do fondant ruffles all over, for example, you're obviously going to charge more for that. There's a lot of different types of buttercream details out there that you need to charge for accordingly. And the next parameter that you need to set is for your fondant detailing. So I know that we just talked about fondant 2D detailing, but this is fondant 3D detailing. So again, what you want to do for this, because now this range is even larger, I think, than the buttercream range. So it's good to have maybe kind of 3 tiers, and then the 4th tier of the most expensive thing is obviously just going to be a plus sign. I've seen a few different ways of setting these guidelines. Some people like to do it by size. Some people like to do it by detail. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. You need to decide what is going to work for you. For me personally, I always try to go with the detailing more so than the size or anything else. Because honestly, a larger piece isn't going to take me that much longer than a smaller piece. For myself, there's no difference between a large Paw Patrol character and a small Paw Patrol character. The only reason why I might charge more for the large one is obviously because there's more materials used. But in terms of time, I really don't think there's that big of a difference for myself. So again, very personal experience. You want to make sure that you choose what's going to work for your pricing guide. But the whole point here is to make sure that you offer some sort of guideline to your customer so that they kind of know what they're getting into even before they order the cake from you. They can see your guideline right there on your website or wherever you're going to have this posted, and they can say to themselves, okay, well, I kind of like this cake and it looks like it might fall under the category of a semi-detailed character, for example. I don't know, whatever you call your different tiers of how you're going to charge. And then that way they're not going in blind, right? And you also still want to give yourself, though, that little leeway room. So if you want to put it's going to be $40 and up, I think that's totally acceptable. The next guideline is even trickier than those last guidelines. Like I said, it's gonna get trickier and trickier. So the next one is specialized things. Now, obviously things like fondant detailing, covered in buttercream smoothly, buttercream details, these are pretty status quo orders. But what about when things get a little bit weirder? For example, let's say they want a surprise cake where they want it where you pull a tab and then all of the money comes out. Or they want you to use their surprise cake stand where you pull a trigger and then it pops out surprise. Now, you want to be able to offer these things. And if you are a pretty advanced cake decorator, then doing things like this probably isn't that difficult for you. However, it can be difficult to learn how to price those things. So I say, anytime you have something very, very specialized, say that you have that option in your pricing guide, but say that it is all by quote. Now, I know that seems a little loosey-goosey maybe because I've been saying this whole video that we want to give our customers a nice solid guideline. But when they're asking for something that's very highly specialized, like a surprise cake, or something you don't normally offer, maybe something like the sugar sheet technique, you want to be able to give yourself that leeway room. I think that most customers understand when they're asking for something highly specialized that you don't necessarily do at your bakery very often, that that's probably most likely going to be done by quote. You do want to say something to the effect of highly specialized cakes will be done by quote. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of pricing is you have to decide whether or not you're going to be able to provide a good quote over the phone or if it's something that needs to be done in person. Again, this goes back to the specialization thing. If it is highly specialized, it's best if you're in person, because sometimes when you spout off the sizing of a cake, for example, to somebody, they don't really know what you're talking about. When you talk about heights of cakes, sometimes they just can't compute. Even for myself, when I've gone to bakeries and I've ordered something that I don't normally make, it can be a little bit confusing for me. Even though I know sizing front to back for my own stuff, it still comes off as a little bit confusing when I'm talking about somebody else's product. So you really do have to decide if you're going to request that customers come and see you so that you can fully discuss the pricing and quoting of your cake properly. Another pricing tip is that you do want to make sure that if you're just starting out, you give yourself time to think. Don't feel like you have to rush into giving them a definitive price right away, because that's when we end up making mistakes like undercharging, and you don't want that to happen. So if you are given a picture by a customer and maybe you're already on the phone with them in a phone conversation, or you're in person with them, you can always say, if you're in person, give me about 5 minutes to come up with the pricing of your cake, and you can go away and go and do that. If you're on the phone, you can say, I'm going to give you a call back to let you know the pricing of this cake. Now I'm going to be giving you some direct pricing of some of the cakes that I've made.
So because we're sticking to a basic pricing guide today, I haven't really talked about tiered cakes or carved cakes at all. So all of the cakes you're going to be seeing are going to be just the regular one-tiered cakes. For ease sake, I'm also going to say that everything that I'm going to be showing you is based off the price of a 6-inch cake. Starting off with this ombre rosette frozen themed cake, I came up with this price because I'm charging for that base buttercream price, as well as the rosette, as well as the ombre and that fondant detailing. This is actually part of a tiered cake, but if I were to just take the top tier and make it a 6-inch, all of that cost is attributed to all of the fondant work. In all of my cake tutorials, I always give a pricing guide at the very end for how much I would personally charge for the cakes. Now keep in mind my area that I live in, as well as the fact that my dollar is in Canadian dollars.
I hope that video gave you guys a little bit of a guideline on how to start pricing your cakes. And I really hope I drove home the importance of giving your customers that little bit of a guideline. It doesn't mean that you have to adhere to it. You need to give yourself a range whenever providing a guideline. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading daily, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!